I was reading through the internet and I found out Oppo is no longer making players. So I quickly placed an order at the Value Electronics website for a Panasonic UB820. They have the exclusive on this player for a couple of months, and they have super fast shipping. Let's unbox it and see if it's the new king of 4K players.
What's up guys, welcome to Spare Change. Here on the channel, we do a lot of home theater related videos, like this one, and we discuss 4K content, so you can watch on players like this. So if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. Today we've got one of Panasonic's highly sought after players, the DP-UB820. The player retails for $499 and sits just below the flagship model, the UB9000. The player uses their HCX processor and features their unique chroma processing technology so you can fine-tune the HDR experience. It's got built-in Wi-Fi as well as smart features. Inside, we get the owner's manual, the remote control. Yes, I realize it's upside down. We also get the power cord and batteries. The UB820 is your standard 17 inches wide. Build quality is a glossy plastic on both front and top of the unit. Power and eject buttons are located on the top right corner, and behind the front drop-down panel, you'll find the LED display, USB input, and the tray door. Around back is the power input, 2 HDMI outputs with one for audio only, a USB and LAN input, 7.1 channel analog outs, and one optical output. Alright, let's get this thing hooked up and run through the setup. Here we have the language selection screen and voice guidance, which is on by default, so it will start talking to you. Here's the output resolution selection, which is 4K 60. Quick start if you're using any IP control, so it's always connected to the network. Now it's just a quick connection to your network in either wired or wireless configurations. And the terms of service agreement. Let's check out the network service because I'm sure there's a new firmware update. And of course there is. This whole process took about 15 minutes, but could be longer depending on your network speed. Okay, let's check out some player settings. Here we have different options for HDMI output. HDR10 is supported, but as far as I know, there isn't any content that's using it right now. If you don't know what HDR10 Plus is, it's basically dynamic HDR like Dolby Vision, which can adjust frame by frame. It's a Samsung creation, so who knows if it'll take off. Now let's take a look at the advanced settings. Here we have color gamut output. If you've got a 4K TV without HDR, this could prove to be useful, as you can keep the wider color gamut intact while stripping away the HDR. We have an SDR to HDR conversion, so if you're watching non-HDR content, as the name implies, it'll give you a faux HDR look. I'm a bit of a purist, so I'm going to keep it off. HLG settings. I've never seen any HLG content, so I'll keep that off too. Now here's HDR type. This is supposed to adjust the tone mapping according to the type of display you have. I'm using a Sony 900F, so I'll use the recommended setting of middle or high luminance since the TV isn't super bright. However, I will try this out on the projector a little bit later. The rest of the settings are kind of self-explanatory, so I'm just going to speed through them, so if you need to see something, just give it a pause. Here's dynamic range compression. I always get questions on what this does. It compresses the audio if you're watching at low volumes, so explosions, etc. won't be so loud, but still keep dialogue intelligible. This is good for late night viewing, but keep it off if you want the full audio output. Digital output. You want to keep this as bitstream if you want Atmos or DTS-X compatibility. It does support 3D playback for those still rocking 3D displays. Alright, let's jump into the apps. It looks like there's only Netflix out of the box. You can customize some of the visuals under settings, otherwise, nothing too special. let's look at the market and see what we can download. This app store is pretty sparse right now, so you're better off using your TV's apps or whatever streaming device you already have. Okay, let's jump into Netflix and check out some Daredevil. As you can see, Dolby Vision isn't supported at the time of this video, but it is said to be coming sometime during the fall. Just a double check of the TV settings, and HDR does work properly. Okay, now I've popped the Sully 4K Blu-ray in. Hitting the playback info button gives you some audio and video stats. Tapping on the HDR setting button gives you 4 options to adjust HDR intensity based upon the type of room you're in. There's standard, natural environment, light environment, and bright environment. The image gets brighter, but highlights will get blown out the higher the setting you choose. Okay, now hitting the option button on the remote will bring up your playback settings. Scrolling down, you have video settings. The HDR optimizer is supposed to dynamically change the tone mapping so detail in those high bright scenes don't get lost. So if you have a TV that doesn't get so bright, this feature could be useful. If you keep an eye out for the lines in the snow, as I turn the HDR optimizer on, you can see the lines are now more visible. When I turn it back off, they're harder to see. Now when the optimizer is on, my picture does dim just a little bit, but I'm going to keep it off and see what the other settings do. You can also try the dynamic range slider. The higher you go up, the brighter the image, though it gets washed out a bit. The lower you go, the more contrast you'll add. There's a brightness slider as well that does somewhat the same thing, but I'll keep both of those at 0. Now changing the white tone curve will raise or lower the white parts of the image. The black tone curve works the same way as it only affects the dark parts of the image. There are other settings as well, but I kept them all at their default settings. Alright, now this is for all the projector users out there. This is the same scene. As you can see, it looks very similar to the one on the TV. Those lines are there, but just a little hard to make out. Turning on the HDR optimizer brings out those lines, but the image again does take a little dip in brightness, so I'm just going to keep that off. After messing around with the settings, the one that worked best for me is the white tone curve. Setting it to a +2 looked the best, keeping the snow bright and white while still keeping those lines visible. Okay, now if you keep your eye on the pillar on the right side of the screen, it looks like it's solid black. Sliding the black tone curve all the way to the right, you can see there are 2 different shades. Going all the way to the left, you'll just crush all the detail. It's kind of hard to tell in the video, but keeping it at a +5 looked the best for my projector. Now everyone's displays will be different, so the settings that worked well for me may not work at all for you. It's just something you'll have to play around with. Alright, I spent a few days watching a bunch of 4K Blu-rays, and it does perform as good if not better than the Oppo 203 that I normally use. I can see some of the benefits of the HDR optimizer, and it seemed to work better on some movies than on others. When the optimizer was engaged, I noticed it dimmed the image just a tad. It's supposed to help retain highlight detail without dimming the image, but that wasn't exactly the case for me. But I'm sure it'll be different with different setups. However, I was able to change the white and black tone curves to bring out some extra detail without affecting the image all too much, all while keeping HDR optimizer off. I also tried a few Dolby Vision Blu-rays, the Mission Impossibles, and Power Rangers, and the optimizer didn't seem to do anything at all. If it did, I didn't notice it. And speaking of Dolby Vision, as I mentioned before, there will be a firmware update supposedly coming this fall that'll get it working. And the word is, it'll work with Sony TVs as well. The player is well built, but not quite as premium feeling as the Oppo player. It weighs a couple pounds lighter, but it does seem better built than the Sony X700 and any of the Samsung and LG players. The UB820 was nice and quiet while playing back Blu-rays, and startup and button react times were quick and speedy. The lack of certain apps is a bit of a bummer, so fingers crossed that Panasonic will add more in the future. In comparing playback with the Oppo player by switching back and forth, I didn't see any glaring differences between the two. Color and sharpness on both looked great, but being able to dial in a little bit of extra detail on the Panasonic gives it a 1-up. There's really only one major feature missing on the Panasonic and every other player that I've had in for review. If you're a projector user and have a fixed anamorphic lens, the 21:9 option is a must-have if you're using a scope screen. So it doesn't seem like I'll be parting ways with the Oppo just yet. If the Panasonic had this feature, I'd be happy to make the switch. Now, if you're just using this on a standard television or using a projector without a lens, I think the granular control you have over adjusting HDR is a major plus for the Panasonic. It's only $500 as of right now and has fantastic video quality. So if you're looking to up your 4K playback game and want to keep it under $1,000, I think the Panasonic is the clear winner. Now, I'd like to send a shout out to Robert over at Value Electronics for hooking us up with this player. They're the only game in town carrying this model exclusively for the next couple of months, at least in the US. So if you want to pick it up, I'll leave a link down below in the description, or you can just call them, but be sure to mention the channel. Now, if you found the video useful, give it a thumbs up, leave us a comment, let us know if you're going to grab this player, follow us on social media, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you guys again in the next one.